Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janabalabha Giribardari Jai Gopi Janabalabha Giribardari Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Banachari Yamunatira Banachari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnu Puran Paramhamsa Paravalikacharya To Tadasata Shri Śrīmad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Grantaraj Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Ki Sambheda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Pada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanbitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, let me just check to see everything's actually working here. Yeah, it appears to be. Yat sanubande sati deha gehe Yat sanubande sati deha gehe Maham iti udadurgraha Maham iti udaduragrahanam Mahamiti udaduragrahanam Mahamiti udaduragrahanam Pumsam sudaram visatopi puryam Pumsam suduram vasatopi puryam Bhajema tate bhagavan padabjam Bhajema tate bhagavan padabjam Yad sanubande satideha gehe Maham iti udaduragrahanam Bhumsam suduram vasatopi puryam Bhajema tate bhagavan padabjam Yad sanubandhe satideha gehe Maham iti udaduragrahanam Pumsam suduram vasatopi puryam Bhajema tate bhagavan padabjam Yat sanubandhe satideha gehe Mamaham ityudhaduragrahanam Pumsam suduram vasatopi puryam Tatte Bhagavan padabjam Yat sanubandhe satideha gehe Mamham ityudhaduragrahanam Pumsam suduram vasatopi puryam Bhajema tatte Bhagavan padabjam. Ladies. Yat sanubandhe satideha gehe Mamaham iti udhaduragrahanam Pumsam suduram vasatopi puryam Bhajema tatte Bhagavan padabjam. Yat, because sa anubandhe, due to becoming entangled. Asati, thus being. Deha, the gross body. Gehe, in the home. Mama, mine. Aham, I. Iti, thus. Udha, great, deep. Duragrahanam, undesirable eagerness. Pungsam, of persons. Suduram, far away. Vasataha, dwelling. Api, although. Puryam, within the body. Bhajema, let us worship. Tat, therefore. Te, your. Bhagavan, O Lord. Pada abjam, lotus feet. The translation reads, O Lord, persons who are entangled by undesirable eagerness for the temporary body and kinsman, and who are bound by thoughts of mine and I, are unable to see your lotus feet, although your lotus feet are situated within their own bodies. But let us take shelter of your lotus feet. So I say, and you please repeat, O Lord, persons who are entangled by undesirable eagerness for the temporary body and kinsman, and who are bound by thoughts of mine and I, are unable to see your lotus feet, although your lotus feet are situated within their own bodies. But let us take shelter of your lotus feet. So here is the purport by Srila Prabhupada. The whole Vedic philosophy of life is that one should get rid of the material engagement of gross and subtle bodies, which only cause one to continue in a condemned life of miseries. This material body continues as long as one is not detached from the false conception of lording it over material nature. The impetus for lording it over material nature is the sense of mine and I. I am the Lord of all that I survey. So many things I possess, and I shall possess more and more. Who can be richer than I in wealth and education? I am the master, I am God. Who else is there but me? All these ideas reflect the philosophy of aham mama, the conception that I am everything. Persons conducted by such a conception of life can never get liberation from the material bondage. But even a person perceptually condemned to the miseries of material existence can get relief from bondage if he simply agrees to hear only Krishna Katha. In this age of Kali, the process of hearing Krishna Katha is the most effective means to gain release from unwanted family affection and thus find permanent freedom in life. The age of Kali is full of sinful reactions, and people are more and more addicted to the qualities of this age. But simply by hearing and chanting of Krishna Katha, one is sure to go back to Godhead. Therefore, people should be trained to hear only Krishna Katha by all means in order to get relief from all miseries. Yat sanubande sati dehagehe mamaham iti udra duragrahanam pungsam suduram visatopi puryam bhajema tate bhagavan padabjam. Only persons who are entangled by the undesirable eagerness for the temporary body and kinsman, and who are bound by thoughts of mine and I, are unable to see your lotus feet. Although your lotus feet are situated within their own bodies, but let us take shelter of your lotus feet. Okay, so we're continuing in this chapter, which is, of course, chapter 5 of the third canto. And we're soon to be finished with this chapter. We started out, this chapter went from verse 1 through 16, which was discussing, the basic idea of Maitreya being approached by Uddhava. And then from 16 through 38, this chapter was the discussion of Maitreya explaining the process of creation unfolding. Then with 39 or so, that's when the demigods began to offer prayers. And that was divided into two sections, which ended with yesterday's verse, which was 34. In that verse, it was discussing the glories of the lotus feet of the Lord. But we're still talking about the glories of the lotus feet of the Lord. However, starting with today's verse, up to the end of this chapter, we will be discussing who does and who does not get the mercy of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. So this is Buri John's breakdown of the 5th chapter of 3rd canto. So we are and have been hearing various descriptions of the deployment of the material universe. And now we're hearing about the Supreme Lord and his lotus feet. How one can overcome, as Ram Roy discussed nicely yesterday, how one can overcome the fear of the material world just by remembering the Supreme Lord, and how by just trying to hear about Krishna and understanding what our real situation is, we become lifted out of this material world. Of course, it was also interesting to hear about the history of Neil the typist, which I've always wondered about, because that's he is the source of many strange things in the original manuscript of the Bhagavad Gita and various other things that Prabhupada spoke into the dictaphone, and then it was Neil who typed them in, But at any rate, that's the kind of side issue. So I thought this particular verse, it discusses here about how we are bound by thoughts of I and mine. Now, as a preview to coming attractions in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, like they do in movies, so we've got a trailer for what's coming up, the sequel or the later on release. In chapter 20 of this canto, of third canto, we will hear Kapila Dev describing to his mother about how when Brahma creates the universe, or rather as the universe is being created by Brahma, we have the creation of ignorance, or various kinds of illusion. So, this is interesting, because if we're going to create a material universe, one of the most important things that we have to have in a material universe, have a good, sound, well-functioning, happy material universe, you're going to have a good dose of ignorance or illusion, because otherwise people would come here from the spiritual world and they'd say, this place, I'm going back, you know. But if that was the case, then being in the material universe would be a trivial affair. And it, well, from our own past experience, it is not a trivial affair. So we come here and we tangled up, but how exactly do that happen, you know? So this is an interesting part, you know. In verse 18 of the 20th chapter of the 3rd canto, Kapila explains to his mother that we have 5 types of illusion, and they are, summarily, Tamishra, Andatramishra, Tamas, Moha, and Mahamoha. So, and when we understand these 5, we begin to get a sense of how exactly this material universe grabs us by the leg and turns us upside down, you know. And it's very interesting the way Prabhupada explains it in the purport, and then Prabhupada quotes from the Vishnu Purana, where it is described in the Vishnu Purana what each of these particular different aspects of illusion are. So this is another way to understand the world that we're in. How does it confuse us so nicely? How does it actually overcome our innate understanding of who we are as spirit soul? How does it wipe out any connection with the spiritual world? How does it cloud over our ability to reason? And why are people actually spirit souls, but if we look outside on a television screen or on a monitor monitoring the internet, we see wars and we see suffering, we see abuse, we see anger, we see violence, we see disease, we see all these things. How is it possible? You know. So here's how it's possible. So we start off with Tamishra, and Tamishra means basically the idea that we envy God or we hate God. That's where it starts. So the living entity is envious of the Supreme. Why does it always have to be Krishna? Why can't sometimes I get at the center of everything? Everybody's running around me and serving me grapes and making flower garlands and all that kind of stuff, you know. So the minute we want that, we come here. And in the material world, once we have left the spiritual world to come here, then Andatamishra takes place. So first there's Tamishra, which is this idea of envy or anger towards the Supreme Lord. Then there's Andatamishra, which means that we think that death is the end of everything. And how many people have you met that believe this philosophy, that death caps it all off, it's the very end of everything? Therefore, we don't have to be worried about karma and retribution and all these kinds of things, or burning in hell or any of these things. We can just enjoy as we please. So this is Andatamishra. Now, this gets into today's topic, tamas. Oh, good old tamas, you know. So, I just remember one devotee one time somebody asked him his name, and he jokingly said, "My name is Thomas Goon." So any rate, That was Buddhi Mantra, by the way, who is no longer with us, but he once said that. At any rate, the idea is that tamas is the basic, complete ignorance of the idea that I am something beyond this body. I identify with this body. Just think of how important that is for the material world. If we were not connected with our body, if we did not think that we were our body, then we would never be connected to our particular type of body, what color that skin is, what color the, whether we're male or female, whether we're, intelligent, what family we come from, what nationality we come from. Everything is tied to our conception of the body because we identify with the body. And this is so deeply rooted in our consciousness. So this is tamas. And because we're identified with the body, in the purport, Prabhupada tells us that actually we then naturally become attracted to sex life. If you identify with the body, you are naturally also attracted to sex life. And with that comes, of course, usually a family and the whole thing. And this is how our life becomes completely not about the spiritual world, but about our everyday material development. And most people are not grihastas, they are grihamedis. Most people are not actually thinking about the spiritual life that they have to undergo while they're in family life. They're thinking about family life, full stop. So this is the nature of the entanglement in material life. And that's what today's verse is. This is a description of this aspect of the illusion or the, ignorance that Brahma has to create. He creates this from his shadow. And Kapila Deva, as he's explaining to his mother Devahuti, is explaining this right at the very beginning of how the material universe is being created. From Brahma's shadow, Chaya, come these various types of illusion. Brahma casts this off. And then in the next verse, the demons go after the shadow because demons are naturally very attracted to these things. So we've talked about Tamishra, Andatamishra, and now tamas, or illusion. So tamas means to identify with the body and to think in terms of I and mine, as Prabhupada puts it in this, actually as this verse itself puts it, And so because we're attracted to I and mine, that the things associated as possessions of this body are mine, then we lose track. Now we have two left to go, moha and maha moha. So from this idea of I and mine, of family, of possessions, of all these things, grow these considerations of my country, my race, my nationality, my ethnic background, all these things. They grow out of it. And as a result, people fight. And that is called moha. And finally, maha moha is the civilization that we see around us. We finally get to what we actually see on the television screens, This whole civilization of people madly trying to increase their own material sense gratification and fighting with others who they feel are competitors for their sense gratification. So that's the world we actually see. So we have these 5 types of illusion that Brahma create. Tamishra, Andatamishra, tamas, moha, and maha moha. And at the very bottom of that purport in 3.20.18, Prabhupada gives the verse from the Vishnu Puran where that's described in Sanskrit. So This is the nature of the world that we live in. Most people will take up the process of becoming married and engaging in a family development. But as Prabhupada said, that we should never see this as the total goal of life, although this is how material nature pushes us. It pushes us to think of things in this way, that we are in a body and we have a family, and now we have to be very careful and very sure that the family is nicely provided for. And this then easily soaks up every drop of human energy that we could possibly have. So the fight, whether one is a sannyasi or whether one is in family life, is to keep that from happening. That we do not get absorbed in the daily fight for one more day to make sure that prasadam is on the table, and that somehow or other that the bills are being met, and that the children are not killing each other, or are in the proper school, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the all-encompassing way that the material world makes our sojourn here in the material world not a trivial affair. We don't come here and bounce right back out, because these 5 things are there. We have, as we said, Tamisha, Andhatra, Tamas, Moha, and Mahamoha. The idea that we envy the Supreme Lord, that we think death is the ultimate end of everything. We have no knowledge of the soul, and therefore we build up false conceptions of I and mine and what's my property. Then we develop societies and associations and countries and military, all based on defending and acquiring certain types of sense gratification resources. And finally, the whole world is mad after doing these things 24/7. So this is how we become overcome. So our basis then is to overcome this by accepting the Lord's lotus feet. We do this by, as Prabhupada says here, hearing Krishna Katha. So we hear Katha about Krishna's pastimes, about how he looks, but more importantly, in one sense, for us at the beginning, how this material universe works, so we are not bamboozled by it, which is very easy to have happen. We are very easily bamboozled by this material world because it is not what it seems like it is. It certainly seems solid. So as we said last week, that to our senses, everything appears very solid. But actually, from Bhagavatam, we learned that it is not. And also from quantum physics, we learned that it is not. Ernest Rutherford performed an experiment where he shot, I think, some kind of beta particles or electrons or something, I forget what it was. He shot it through very thin tin foil. And he was going to see, how the particles deflected off the atoms in the thin tin foil. And what he discovered is, for the most part, they passed right through like it wasn't there, which of course bewildered him. But he did notice that on a very small percentage, sometimes they bounced off at a slight angle, and sometimes they didn't make it through at all. And this bewildered him, but eventually everybody came to figure it out, that actually in the atom, it's mostly empty space. I don't want to scare anybody, but what's going on is, what is the atom? It's mostly empty space, So as these particles are going through, they didn't hit anything, so they went straight through the gold foil as if there was nothing there. And so this is the unsettling realization also, if one studies physics, that matter is mostly not there. So how is it that when we fall off a building, we smash into the concrete and die? How does that work? Well, the fact is that there are repulsive forces that keep collections of matter from passing through one another. This works, of course, with matter, but it doesn't work with energy. Energy easily passes through things. That's why we can broadcast these things on the internet, and it's going through the walls and makes not a whole lot of difference. But for really fermions, for the most part, as far as I understand it, they have the Pauli exclusion principle where they can't pass through one another. They can't occupy the same place in space and time. They have to stay away. Whereas for bosons, they can go right through one another, the force particles. So therefore, the material world is not what it seems like it is. It seems solid, but it actually is not. It's mostly empty space. And again, these are energies of the Supreme Lord, as we said the other day. And I wanted actually to mention something that I should have mentioned a week ago. It's been sort of bumping around in my mind. Nikeshri asked about, what we could use as kind of evidence that this is not a bottom-up world, that things don't form from basic building blocks bumping together and creating more and more and more and more complex things. Rather than, as we understand it in Bhagavatam, that things come from the most complex thing, which is the Supreme Lord, and gradually are created through the Supreme Lord and then later through Brahma, through successive stages in development. So one of the things that's obvious, of course, is the idea of entropy, that we never see that matter left to its own devices organizes itself into anything. It just mostly stays put. And if anything, we see that if you take something that's a very complex thing, it does not become more complex over time. It becomes less complex over time. If you take this little complex gadget right here I have in my very left hand here, we all possess these, and you leave it out on the street, well, of course, someone will steal it, but if that doesn't happen, if you leave it in some obscure place, eventually the weather will make it much less complex than it is now. It'll stop functioning, and then gradually it will rust and so many other things, So we see that things do not become more complex. Rather, things become less complex as time goes forward. And the only thing that adds complexity is, strangely enough, life, Before this was created, there were lots of various kinds of elements in the ground, and people had to organize those elements, refine them, tool them, put them together, think of how they would be put together, and after many stages of manufacturing process, finally we get this nice little Qualcomm Wonder Bunder, so we have this thing with us now. But the creation of it was from less complex things into more complex things. So we see wherever there is a rise in complexity, which means going against the grain of entropy, there is an intelligent agency involved in some way or another. Why didn't the universe just expand out with dust and maybe clump together, but end of story? Why did we finally get human beings and all that other stuff that goes on there? At any rate, I just wanted to briefly touch on that. And all right, so I want to leave plenty of time for feedback and questions. Anyone have any questions about any of this that we've discussed so far? Yes. Are they sequential? Well, maybe, but I think they come kind of like boom, 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 boom. They don't come like, one happens and then another gradually happens. And we can see, as we talk to people and as we live our lives as devotees, that these are things we deal with every day. These are the ways that the material energy tries to keep us in its clutches. But if we chant Hare Krishna and we try to engage in devotional service, we begin to see through these various arrangements of Maya. We begin to see. And then we can see where our own attachments are, Do we still envy Krishna? Do we still think in terms of that death might be the end of everything, that it'll be lights out then? Do we still feel that we are our body? How much are we concerned with it? Do we identify with various nationalities, ethnic backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera? And finally, are we still after the rat race for material resources? These are various ways that illusion works. And as far as I know, there's nowhere in any scripture or in any scientific journal that this information is given. Yet this is so kind of, when you hear it, it's very obvious that these things are operating in our everyday lives. It's very obvious that these things are operating in the lives of others. And of course, if you understand them, then you get sort of terrified by the whole thing, how easy it is to be turned upside down by all this. But again, as we've been hearing, by accepting the shelter of the Lord's lotus feet, one can actually rise above all these things. However, if we don't accept it, even we may rise high, but still we will fall again. Yene rabandaksha vimukta maninas tvayashta babada vishuddha buddhaya aruya krishchena parampadam tata patantyaro nadrata yusmadangrayaha. So that there are those who might imagine themselves to be very elevated, but actually they're avishuddha buddhaya. Their intelligence is not pure. So what happens? They fall down again, patantiyadha. So they fall again into the material world. And as Prabhupada puts, the last snare of Maya is thinking that you are God. In the beginning, we just want to push God out of the center and be there ourselves. Later, we think, well, why do we have to push God out? We already are God, so we don't have to push anybody out. We just become God. So it's much more subtle. And because of these various misconceptions, when you hear the explanation of what's going on here, everything falls into place in the world we actually see, the one that we see on our little cell phone whiz gadgets, in the world that we see on TV screens, the world people talk about. It all falls into place. Why is all this going on? Because people are clamoring after resources that they're fighting over. Why do they want those resources? Because they're convinced they're the body, and the things the body has are necessary. We need to actually, provide for our various material desires. And as we're hearing in today's verse, because we're providing for our desires, we must provide for desires of our spouse and the children and all that too. So we have to do battle with the material world for these things, these resources, so that all of our sense gratification can be nicely arranged. So this is kind of how it works. And if we understand that this is what's going on, then it's easier to not take it so seriously, even though still, it has an amazing ability to magnetically attract our mind and bamboozle us. That reasonable reply? Yeah, yes, Matunga. Mahamoha. Well, in Prabhupada's explanation in that verse, essentially these things kind of, expand out into one another. But Prabhupada puts it as being mad. If you look at, let's go there. Coming attractions here, 3:20:18. Prabhupada at the bottom of it, he quotes this verse from the Vishnu Puran: Tamo viveko moha syad anta karana vibramaha maha mohastu vigyeyo gramya boga sukaishana maranam hyanda tamishram kroda uchyate avidya pancha parvaisha pradur bhuta mahatmanaha. So I'm not sure exactly what the translation of Tamo Viveka Moha Syad, see if it mentions Moha. Prabhupada doesn't translate directly the Vishnu Purana, but he describes that Maha Moha means to be mad after material enjoyment, especially in the age of Kali, So in one sense, they kind of blend into one another, which is also indicative by the similar name, Moha and Maha Moha. But Moha means that these categories start to develop as far as I can see. And then Maha Moha is when various actions start to develop based on those categories, So as we were saying, with Tamishra, it's just this idea of envy, envying or being angry at the Supreme. And then Anda Mishra is thinking that death is the end of everything. So with that basic mistake, those two are seemingly different. They're related, but they're seemingly different. Those two things seem to be connected. And then we have tamas, which seems to be what everything is born out of, this basic understanding of who we are and what this world is all about, and from that then we can see how from tamas we get moha, which is based on our identification with the body and lack of identification with the spirit, that we get the next stage, which is these various identifications with categories that are born out of our misidentification. Then from the categories born out of our misidentification, we get, at least the way I understand it, Mahamoha, which is actions based on those categories of our misidentification. You had a question.
That's why I was just thinking about, you were mentioning the point of, the Griha-Matis, that shouldn't just be absorbed in family life.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking, a lot of the people we meet on a daily basis, just even to do those basic things, it's like they have to work 3 jobs.
Right.
And they say to us, your practice of spiritual life seems so impractical. How am I going to chant 16 rounds and do all these things and still live my life and take care of my family? It's impractical.
Right. That's kind of what Ram Roy was saying yesterday, that Prabhupada was explaining to someone about his process of spiritual life. And the customs agent or the interviewer, the government agent, was saying, "Oh, that sounds very difficult," And Prabhupada says, "No, it's not so difficult. We just hear about Krishna, and Krishna does everything." So, yeah, I know. That's actually the whole same thing, And this is one of those things that I think is very important, because most people, they kind of wind up reaching out for that one last dollar, and on their deathbed, they've still got that arm out there, and, if I could just have that one more dollar, then my life would be somehow better. And because of this is the way that people block it out. As Prabhupada said, when he was trying to distribute his Back to Godhead personally before he came to the United States, he was in India, he would go to these tea stalls and try to sell. And people would say, no time, no time. Now, what does it mean they have no time? They have time, but they have no time because they think all my time has to be budgeted towards, this idea of maintaining my griha, And and what does it take to maintain the griha? It's not like there's some list somewhere with numbers, and once you've achieved those numbers, then your griha is nicely taken care of. It's up to you how elaborately you want. And of course, materially thinking, we always want to make it much more gorgeous than it is now, And because of that, that's how there's never any time for spiritual life, unless we attack that concept first, that, all right, I have to downsize what I think I need for my family. I have to downsize what I think I need for myself. So there's some time for spiritual life. So this is kind of the number one fight that one has to engage in, with people and with oneself, in making progress in spiritual life. There was some other questions. We'll take Krishna Kripa first. Right.
But we were talking about this I and I was seeing it operate yesterday because I was sitting at this train station, and apparently there's some people who set up some selling clothes and they play loud Christian music to a speaker, and they've been coming for 14 years, and I was just sitting there singing Hare Krishna, and they pulled up with their stuff, and they were like flipping out. You come here for 14 years. Like they own the train station, and it was their property, and it was like, whoa. It's like,
Right.
And I was getting to sing until they finished setting up and then go away. But they didn't even give me time to explain that. They were just like laid into me,
Right.
And it feels all motivated by this conception that, that they were the provider of that place.
Right. They've made their stake and claim, and with Brahma's records somewhere, there's their name there on that train station. Actually, that's why the city regulates those things, because there are those fights over who actually owns a piece of block in Manhattan here and there. Each one of those places is considered, like prime something or another. And even though it's just a piece of gray concrete, being there is essential. Keshri, you had a question.
I remember when I first moved in the Brahmacharya in Australia, there was a picture of Krishna's lotus feet. There were Krishna's lotus feet, Radharani's lotus feet, Gauranga's lotus feet, and I used to sleep just next to them. And you also hear how in the first canto and second canto, they're like Krishna's lotus feet especially. But still, like in my own personal life, yesterday, Krishna Kripa was sharing how whenever, or he remembered once how he was attacked by Maya, and he just meditated on Krishna's form, or Maya would like
Okay. Well, I'll give you a quick answer because this notice sign that's impossible not to notice is telling me that the clock on the wall is 2 minutes over. So I'll give you the Reader's Digest summary version here. That Krishna's lotus feet, yusmad angraya, so Krishna has his lotus feet. And by taking shelter of Krishna, of course it means his feet, actually, we can see that his feet have beautiful things on them. They have a rod for controlling elephants and, all these other things, thunderbolt and conch, etc., etc. But as well, by bowing, usually the feet are the lowest part of the body. So if we take very seriously even the lowest part of Krishna's body, then we become sheltered by the rest of Krishna, by Krishna's full being, So, of course, there's no real difference between his feet and any other part of his body. However, by prostrating ourselves, recognizing that we are lower than Krishna, that we want to serve Krishna, which is hard for us to do. Our false ego demands that we do not do that. But at any rate, by doing that, then we become gradually aware that we are, protected by Krishna. We are given shelter. All right, so I could say more, but I don't want to incur the wrath of whoever has placed this notice speaker here. So thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.